Hello everybody. Earlier this morning I woke up to the news that Anastasia Beverly Hills is launching the Norvina Volume 3 palette. Since they've already launched the Norvina Volume 1 palette, they've already announced the Norvina Volume 2 palette, and they're already announcing the Norvina Volume 3 palette all within the space of a month. I was instantly hit with a variety of opinions, and I decided to sit down with you guys and create a video about it. It is no secret that Anastasia Beverly Hills has been releasing many different palettes this year, and today we're going to be weighing whether or not these quick fire releases are good or bad for the Anastasia Beverly Hills brand. We're also going to talk about how these releases reflect on the consumerism laden mentality of the makeup world, and lastly we're going to be discussing each of the 3 new Norvina palettes. I will be including timestamps in the description box if you're interested in sort of skipping around this video, because there is a lot to talk about and I am coming at this with a lot of different angles. But first, let's talk about whether or not these quick fire releases are good or bad for Anastasia Beverly Hills' image. Now, not gonna lie, I was initially of the opinion that launching these quick fire releases was a very negative thing for the Anastasia Beverly Hills brand. For a while, in my opinion, Anastasia Beverly Hills has been that brand that seems to really think about their releases, really contemplate what they're releasing, and they really seem to work really hard on releasing and promoting certain items. But recently it seemed that they have been promoting things one after the other, and it's sort of like they promote one thing and they release one thing, and then a few days later they promote and they release something else. So it's like a never-ending flow of new makeup product. And initially I was like, okay, this is definitely not a good thing. Because it's oversaturation and it's bad. But I recently did watch Lauren May Beauty's video in which she broke down literally every single release that Anastasia Beverly Hills has come out with since the beginning of this year. That was a great video because she literally broke down each release and she talked about the timing of the announcements and the launch date and how they all correlated with one another. And in that video she made a really great point. She talked about how it's not necessarily a bad thing that they're releasing so much makeup, because they're really trying to cater towards different types of audiences. They know that some people might like a certain thing more than another certain thing, and they're really interested in always staying in the makeup conversation, always staying in the spotlight, and always being talked about. And she did say that that is integral to the success of the brand. And I actually did find myself agreeing with that statement, because whenever we're talking about branding, whenever we're talking about a business, it's always so important for brands to always be talked about, to always be on all of our radars. And Anastasia Beverly Hills for a while now has been a very popular brand. They're really good at marketing. They're really great at retaining this like glamorous sort of sensibility and still remaining quite accessible. They're always sending PR to large and small influencers. They really know how to make people fall in love with the brand. And it is my belief that Anastasia Beverly Hills team has really been focusing on the really significant amount of products that have been launching, and they have decided that in order to keep up with that, they want to launch a significant amount of products themselves. Lauren really broke it down so well, because watching her video and seeing the proof that she provided, you can see that Anastasia Beverly Hills, they launch a new thing about once every 2 weeks. That's their usual kind of pacing, and they like to promote a certain thing, launch a certain thing, and then a few days later launch or announce another makeup item. So in that way they're able to always stay in the conversation. Initially, wherein I thought that they were oversaturating the market, now I think, wow, they're really thinking about their business and they're trying to launch different things for different people. They're not launching the same things over and over again. They're really trying to launch makeup for different kinds of makeup lovers. Sometimes you see them launching like more neutral related stuff. Other times you've seen them really sort of try to stick to the colorful makeup trend and try to launch products for those kinds of makeup lovers. So in that case, them releasing so much product is really good for their brand. However, I do want to take this conversation into my next point, how these releases reflect the consumerism-laden mentality of the makeup world. Now, I think that if you are a makeup lover, you really need to figure out what kind of makeup lover you are. Are you a collector, or are you a makeup user? I've spoken about this in several of my videos, most notably in my curating your makeup collection video. I'll put that in the cards if you haven't seen it, but in that video I really just laid out different strategies that you can use to identify whether or not you're really into the collector's aspect of makeup, or if you're actually interested in using makeup and you're not that concerned about actually collecting it. Check that video out if you want to see more of that information. But I think that especially with these new makeup releases, it's really important to figure out what really makes you tick when it comes to makeup. Are you really interested in actually using it, or do you want to have that collector's item in your collection? And looking at these Norvina palettes, it's important to realize that these are $60 a piece. So when looking at these palettes, you really have to figure out if you are interested in actually collecting them or if you're interested in actually using them. Also, do you really need these palettes? Do you have these colors in your collection? To help out with this, we're going to segue into my third section of this video, in which we're going to take these palettes, we're going to break down each and every single one. I'm going to talk about the color stories, and I'm also going to talk about the overall theme of each one of these palettes, and I'm also going to convey to you guys what person I think fits each and every single one of these palettes, because in my opinion, I don't think that anybody really needs all three of these palettes. I think that each one of these individual palettes are created for a certain specific type of makeup consumer, and that's how we're going to discuss these palettes. Now, the first palette is the Norvina Volume 1 palette. It was announced on August 26th and it launched on August 27th. This palette has already made its rounds in the makeup industry, and I'm sure that we've all seen the reviews, the tutorials created with this palette. I'm going to make it brief. This palette, in my mind, is a purple palette, but it definitely has a lot of pops of blue, red, orange, yellow, and a few neutrals as well. I really do stick to my opinions in thinking that this is definitely a palette that was quite difficult for me to digest. I felt like it was trying to be a purple palette, but I do feel like there was a lot going on here. They seem to really want to jam in those yellows, oranges, reds, and blues and purples all into one palette, so I felt like that was a little bit difficult to digest. However, if you haven't gotten this palette yet, I do think that it's a really interesting take on a fall-inspired palette. Purples are really fun colors to use. They're very flattering on so many different skin tones and so many different types of makeup looks, and I really do think that this palette has a good selection of purples in it, combined with those yellows, combined with those reds and oranges that would look good with several shades in this palette. Is this my favorite color story? No, but I do think that if you are lacking purple in your collection and you also want to integrate a little bit of yellow in your collection as well, this would be a good palette to look at. I do want to say that even though there are a few neutrals in here, I definitely wouldn't buy this palette if you are a neutral lover, because the problem with this is there are so many really colorful shades in here that I think that it would be a little bit overwhelming and this palette would remain unused in your collection. However, if you want to collect it, that's totally fine, but if you want to use this palette and you're a neutral lover, I don't think that you'd be using it that much. However, if you're a color lover and or if you're trying to get into color and you don't have a lot of purples or pinky tones in your collection, this would be a good option. Next up, I want to talk about the Norvina Volume 2 palette. Now, this palette was announced, I believe, around the 21st, definitely pretty recently, guys, and this is supposed to be available on September 26th. So this is roughly just a month after the first Norvina palette released. In my opinion, the marketing for this palette has really been focused on the blue tones in this palette. However, there are a lot more colors in here than just the blues. You do also have greens, you have those pops of pinks and oranges and yellows, and you do have maybe three-ish neutral shades in here as well. I do want to say that this is definitely not necessarily a traditional fall palette. If you are looking for those fall tones, if you are a neutral lover, this is definitely not that palette for you because it has so much color in here and it's a very neon looking palette. If you disregard a lot of the neutral colors in this palette, you will see that a lot of the colors in here are super neon. So this is honestly, in my mind, a great palette for somebody who loves color but doesn't have a lot of cool tones in their collection. If you want to enjoy more cool tones, if you want to integrate more neons into your collection, this would be a good palette for you because it has all that. However, like I said before, if you are a neutral lover, this might not be the best option for you because it's literally colorful and it's almost a rainbow palette and it's really, really vibrant. I will say that when I first initially saw this palette, I was like, wow, this is a rainbow palette. However, actually looking at it now, I do think that it's a little bit more of a cool tone palette. It's definitely chiefly composed of cool tones with a few pops of pinks and orange and yellow. Moving on now, we have the last palette that we're going to talk about, the Norvina Volume 3 palette. Again, like the last palette, you have 25 shades in this palette, and this will also be priced at $60. And interestingly enough, this will be available on the 26th, the same date as the Norvina Volume 2 palette will be available. So it's clear to me that they're not necessarily expecting people to go all out and buy both palettes or even all three of the palettes. Rather, it seems to me that they're trying to give us options. They're trying to curate these palettes for a slightly different selection of people. It's definitely a warm tone palette, a more updated version of a warm tone palette, and if you are a neutral lover, I think that this would be a perfect palette for you because you have those neutral colors in here. You have a few more fun colors to potentially play around with, but all in all, you have a color palette that is very focused on the warm tones, on the neutral tones, on the yellows, on the oranges. And in my mind, this makes the palette a really neutral lovers friendly palette because you can really create a lot of neutral looks with this palette. If you are a neutral lover, this would be a good palette for you. I would not necessarily recommend getting the Volume 2 palette at all if you're a neutral lover, unless you're interested in it, of course. And I also think that the Norvina Volume 1 palette is definitely more for those of you who are more interested in purple, but the Norvina Volume 3 palette really speaks to a lot of, in my opinion, neutral lovers. Now, looking at all of these palettes right here, you definitely see a lot of really similar colors in each of the palettes, which is understandable because you literally have 25 colors in each one of these palettes. So that definitely brings me back to one of the points that I made in this video. You don't need all three of these palettes unless you're a collector. If you're a collector, sure, go for it. Would I want to spend $180 on 3 palettes plus tax plus shipping? Well, maybe not shipping, but you know, you get my point, you know, like I wouldn't want to spend $180 on these palettes, but if you're a makeup collector, maybe that's what you want to do. However, if you're like the average person who just loves makeup and really is interested in finding a bigger palette to add to their collection that has a lot of different shades in it, any one of these 3 palettes might work for you. Just try and gauge which color story you vibe with the most. With that being said, I do have to wrap this video up. Thank you so much for watching till the end of this video. I hope you found it interesting. I hope you gained some value, or at the very least, I do hope that you found it entertaining to watch. Thank you for your time, and I will see you all in tomorrow's video. Bye, guys.